Okay, let's talk about why people deconstruct. Now, the first thing I want to talk about in this context, let's go through some myths about why people deconstruct, because this is really damaging. How many people throw around these different ideas of why people deconstruct that are totally false. And in that, we're going to look at some data, and then we're going to look at what are some of the actual reasons that people do deconstruct. So we'll probably touch on a lot as we go through some myths, but I want to touch on 10 major myths that people throw around frequently about why people deconstruct. I've not memorized these off the top of my head, so I'm going to read them off the screen. So you see me looking off screen, I'm going to go through a list. You have to forgive me. But the first one is that people choose to deconstruct because they don't want to go to church anymore. Now, this is quite a funny one. It's interesting because actually when we look at the data on people that deconstruct, about 1/3, about 34%, give or take, still attends church at least once a week. Now, we do see that as people mature in their deconstruction, that number starts to drop, but we still see that 10-15% of people attend church regularly, at least once a week, as a deconstructing Christian. And so it's not black and white that people just don't want to go to church and that's why they deconstructed. To be honest, there's a lot easier ways to just not go to church. You don't have to go through an existential, terrifying process of being unsure of what you believe in, where you're going to go when you die, and totally erode all your friends, your family, all those relationships. And so it's not as simple as people just not wanting to go to church. In fact, some data points to when Packard and Hope did an interesting study in 2014, looking at over 1,000 people across America who had left church, and they thought, well, they probably just wanted to leave church. It's one of the things they thought. What they found is actually people on average, looking back at their time in the church, said that they can see a point in the past where they probably should have left church. And what's interesting is on average, that point was 7 years before they actually left. So many people stayed in church because they wanted to make church work for them. They love the church. People that deconstruct very rarely hate the church. They go through stages of realizing how harmful the church had been to them and how much it wasn't helpful for them and all sorts of different stuff. Absolutely. But most of them love church. Most of them attended church. What's interesting is when you look at attendance of people that leave, people that have deconstructed, their attendance while they were a conventional Christian is higher than the average person as a conventional Christian. So if you attend church more frequently, you're more likely to deconstruct. And so it wasn't that these people just wanted to leave church. They were very passionate about church. The second myth is that people deconstruct because they were never serious about their faith in the first place. People say this all the time. You're going to hear this a lot. If you're deconstructing, you will hear this a lot. Well, you were never really a Christian. You were never really serious. That same study that looked at people and their church attendance, we can see the same thing across a lot of different metrics. So what's interesting is the more involved in church you were, the more involved in Christianity you were, the more passionate about your faith you were, the more likely you are to deconstruct. We can see that if you grab 100 people that have deconstructed and 100 people in the church, of the people that deconstruct, they are more likely to pray regularly, to read their Bible regularly, to have quiet times, to go to small groups, to do prayer meetings, to help out in youth groups and other meetings. They're more likely to be in senior leadership or other leadership positions in the church. They're more likely to volunteer in the church than the 100 random people chosen from a church. And so it's not that these people were not serious about their faith. In fact, it's generally because these people were so serious about their faith. They looked into it to such a degree, they got into it to such a degree that the problems within that framework became more apparent. That's what caused them to question. In fact, you could say that it was their passionate pursuit of God that caused them to leave the conventional Christian model. And again, I don't want to say leave church because a lot of people don't leave church that deconstruct. It's not black and white. There's about 1/3 of people still in church that are deconstructing. The third one is that people deconstructing wanted an easier life. Now, this is going to make most people that have been deconstructing for a little while, you will laugh your head off at hearing this, but it will feel like a gut punch when people say it to you. There is nothing easier about deconstructing. Deconstructing is one of the hardest processes you can go through in your life. You are signing up for absolute existential crisis. Your entire identity is wrapped up in what you believe. All our identities are wrapped up in what we believe. Our ego is built around the things that we believe about life, about the cosmos, about God, about our friends, about our family, about ourselves. All of that is interwoven. If you're a conventional Christian, it's interwoven with your belief in God, what you think about spirituality, how you read the Bible, all these things. When you start pulling those things apart, everything falls apart. It's scary. You feel guilt. You feel shame. You feel regret. You feel fear. You feel anxious. You feel uncertainty and paralyzed by it all. It is painful. And then add the icing on the cake. All your friends and family start grilling you, questioning you, rejecting you. You're no longer welcome in church. Your family say you can't be around here if you believe that. We don't want you influencing the grandkids or whatever it might be. There is a lot of rejection to face. There is nothing makes this easier. It's such a bizarre notion. I guess it's where we're at in our life, right? We're in a certain framework that we see the Christian life as the hard life and everyone else is easy. But actually that transition from out of conventional Christianity into something else is extraordinarily hard. You cannot say that people deconstruct because they want things to be easier. The fourth one that we want to talk about is people choose to deconstruct because it's cool and trendy. Now, this is really funny again, because when we look at what we just mentioned there, like, can you imagine signing yourself up for all that pain, all that suffering, all that hardship just because it would look cool and trendy? In fact, who are you trying to look cool and trendy to? Because most people that deconstruct don't have a social circle outside of conventional Christianity. They may have a few, workplace mates or a few mates from school or something, but on the whole, all of their friends, all their family tend to be within conventional Christianity. Conventional Christianity is a very bubbled society. The community can be very bubbled. We reach people outside of that to evangelize and to witness, but on the whole, our closest people are inside the group. And I guarantee none of them are going to think you're cool or trendy if you deconstruct. They're going to not like that you deconstruct. They're going to push back on you. They're going to reject you. They're going to question you. They're going to start treating you very differently. There's nothing about being cool and trendy that people tend to deconstruct because of. There's no desire to be seen as cool and trendy because most of the people they know in their lives are going to think that they are a heretic, that they are apostate, that they have rejected God, that they are the worst type of person. It's one thing to be outside the church and not inside, but it's a whole other thing to be inside and then choose to leave. Christianity does not tend to treat such people very well, conventional Christians. And so it's not a move to make you more popular for the vast majority of people. The fifth one we're going to look at is people deconstruct because they don't know enough and just need the truth explained to them better. This is very funny as well. As I said before, the people that deconstruct tend to have read their Bibles more, be more passionate about their faith, pray more often, be more actively involved in church. They're more likely to be in leadership and even senior leadership. All of that makes you more likely to deconstruct, not less likely. So it's very rare that people that deconstruct, and it happens, of course, there's a whole spectrum of people that deconstruct, but it's very rare that people deconstruct because they don't understand something. It's generally because they have understood the conventional Christian position on something. They have understood how the Bible is explained. They have understood what that theological answer is. And it just doesn't add up. They're just not satisfied with it. And they go, this doesn't work. I don't get it. We need to, and they start exploring more answers. What you'll find, and you see this a lot, it's really funny, is conventional Christians go, well, you just need to read the Bible more and you just need to know this. Is the person they're saying that to, the person that's deconstructed, knows the Bible just as well, if not better than them. In fact, they've generally read more about this topic. You see this commonly maybe in someone that's LGBTQ+, right? And so maybe they are working through their own identity and going, gosh, I'm queer or I'm trans and I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I fit in Christianity? Because it seems like no one's particularly pro me. No one's signing up saying, hey, gay people, come along to church, As people are going through that process and going, gosh, I need to figure out how this works, I guarantee they will have read a lot more theological books on every side of the debate about the LGBTQ issue. And yet their friends will go, well, the Bible makes it clear. They probably can't even quote all the Bible verses they think mention homosexuality or something like that. It's fascinating to me the lack of understanding and how much conventional Christians tend to be projecting their own inexperience when they attack people that are leaving. Because people that are leaving, generally speaking, again, the cost is so high. It's such a high cost to leave the church. You lose your friends, your family, your community. You go through terrible existential questioning and doubt and fear and shame and guilt. As you choose to do that, you only do that because this is really not working and you need to find something different. You need to find the truth. People who are deconstructing know things very well and generally speaking are deeply seeking out the answers and are probably much better educated theologically than the average person within church. People in church aren't better trained than people outside of church in theology. That's not the case. That's not how it works. All right, sixth myth. People who deconstruct must have never truly known God and their faith wasn't real. Now, this is the ultimate kind of disqualifying gaslighting experience, right? Because you go to someone and you say, yeah, I'm deconstructing. I'm not sure I believe in that form of God anymore. I maybe still believe in Jesus and God, but like not as you believe them or whatever. Or maybe you go, hey, I'm an atheist now or I'm agnostic and I just don't believe that. And what they'll say is they go, oh, well, you must never have truly been a Christian. You weren't ever really saved. What a fascinating thing to say to someone that has been at the same church as you for 20 years, that has taught you in Sunday school or in church on certain occasions, they've preached or something. What a fascinating thing to say to someone that has had a devout prayer life and read the Bible regularly. What a fascinating thing to say to someone that you saw profess their faith and get baptized. At what point do we start going, well, who the heck is saved then? Because all these things that I think mean someone is saved apparently mean nothing. Nothing at all. Because I can disqualify someone that's done all of them if they just change their mind. If they change their mind, none of it was ever real. That's such a kind of crazy position to take. Sure, I guess on some level it might be true. That might be how God works. Maybe he tricks some people into thinking they're saved, but they're never really saved. Maybe some Calvinists might hold that position. But there's a huge amount of evidence that those who deconstruct and those who de-church are just as passionate, just as active in their faith than the average churchgoer. They were just as involved, they were just as passionate, they were just as intentional about their faith and just as committed and serious about their faith. If you ask most people to deconstruct, well, do you think you were really saved? I guarantee the vast majority of them will say, yeah, I thought I was saved. Yeah, I really believe this. I believe this with everything in me. People don't do the things they do unless they believe it. Like they really believed it. And so this is fascinating. And it may even be some projection. Again, maybe some people are questioning their faith, but they're so scared to actually really go about that they project onto other people. You never really believed. But who knows? Let's move on to myth 7. People deconstruct because they've forgotten what God has done in their life and just need to be reminded. Now, this is fascinating. I get this a lot. People will say, well, Phil, don't you remember that you were in a meeting and someone got healed? Or Phil, don't you remember that when you needed that job and we all got together and prayed and you got the job? It's fascinating to me that people cannot fathom that you could change how you see those experiences, that you could change where you're at. If you believed in Santa as a child and then grow up and go, oh, I'm not sure I believe in Santa anymore, it would be pretty ridiculous to run up to that person as a 28-year-old and go, but don't you remember the presents under the tree appeared magically and the cookies on the fireplace disappeared? Like, of course there's a Santa. You're just forgetting the great works of Santa. Of course, as a kid, we truly believed that was Santa. But as we grew up, we started to realize, oh, there's other explanations for this. Maybe mom and dad put presents under the tree. Maybe mom and dad take the cookies away, eat them, or throw them in the trash, and to add a bit of excitement and mystery. Maybe they take a bite, maybe they sprinkle some fake snow on the floor around footprints, all these fun things. But we start to realize that there's different ways to see it. And so generally speaking, people that deconstruct, they've not just forgotten that season of their life. They've not forgotten what it was like to be a Christian. They've not forgotten what it was like to feel that God was answering their prayers and to see amazing things. But generally speaking, what's happened is they've come to a place where they can now look on those experiences and they found different answers that work within the framework of where they're at in their life now. Doesn't mean that they're right, doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that they have grown and developed beyond seeing it the way they used to. And so just reminding them is not going to change their position. They didn't deconstruct because they forgot that God did amazing things in their life. That's not how this works either. Myth 8, people deconstruct because they were hurt by the church and should just get over it and stop playing the victim, right? How many people hear this? Well, first of all, let me say this, right? If you were hurt by the church, if you went through some sort of abuse in the church, if you were treated poorly in the church, that's a good reason to leave, okay? So first of all, people say this as though it's a bad reason. It's not a bad reason. If you knew someone was being beaten by their partner, and then they left their partner, they got divorced them, or they went to a shelter or something, you wouldn't say, oh, well, Sheila just left her husband because she was being beaten. No! Sheila left her husband because she was being beaten. That's a good reason to leave your husband. Okay? And so abuse and hurt within the church being caused to people is a good reason for them to start questioning things and to look at moving beyond where they are. Those are really good reasons. Now, what's interesting is that's not why people leave. It's why a handful of people leave, yes. But I go back to the Packard and Hope study that I mentioned earlier. They did a study over 1,000 people that had left the church, and their number one hypothesis, they had 3 hypotheses. Number 1 was they got hurt in church and they left. That's what they thought they would find. Now, what's interesting is they were conventional Christians, so it's not surprising that they thought this, right? All of their hypotheses were some of these myths, and all of them were proven wrong. What's interesting. So they looked at this thing of going, well, but let's look and see, were people hurt in church? And what they found is, yeah, lots of people were hurt in church. In fact, everyone has been hurt in church. In control groups of just regular Christians, they've been hurt in church. People say this all the time, oh, everyone gets hurt. It's full of church. It's full of broken people. Where do you expect to find perfect people? All these different, little tokenisms that we throw around. So everyone was hurt in church, yes. But when they asked, did you leave because you were hurt? The answer was no. And when they asked, when were you first hurt? It actually started to correlate with that date when they look back. And they said, well, actually, it was about 7 years ago I realized I probably should have started to leave church. Now, of course, at 7 years in average, the window is much broader. Some people left a year later or a few weeks later, and some people left decade later. But on average, people stayed for over 7 years when they were hurt. And actually, people went through repeatedly being hurt, but they stuck around and they believed in the system of church. They wanted to change church. They wanted to be a part of church. They wanted to be a part of this community. So out of those 1,000 people, well, over 1,000 people that they studied in that study, none of them can say that honestly that they left because they were hurt. You might say that, well, maybe on some subconscious level they left because they were hurt. And maybe that is the case. But plenty of people get hurt in church and don't leave. So it doesn't seem to be as black and white as that. There's other things going on. And so people don't leave, don't deconstruct their faith because they were hurt. That's not why people deconstruct. All right, 9th myth. We're getting there. All right, you holding in all right? People who deconstructed, must never have really believed. Perfect, we've done it. Let's move on. Must have got an overlap there. All right, here we go. This is a good one. People who deconstruct are just liberals who should just go to progressive churches, right? And so people see a tendency, as people deconstruct, they tend to become a little bit more liberal or progressive. Now, this is not too surprising, really, if we think about it. So conventional Christianity based a lot of its concepts and its ways of life on a very ancient way of life, right? So much of the rules and the ways of doing things came about 2,000 years ago. In fact, a lot of them came about 3,500, 4,000 years ago. And so, of course, they're quite conservative, traditional values, a lot of them. But what's interesting is it's quite natural when you stop placing all your beliefs in those traditional waypoints. You don't believe that the book of Leviticus and Exodus and Deuteronomy should dictate how you build a sexual ethic today, it's quite natural that people would then start to move towards a more liberal position on sexual ethics. Might be quite conservative compared to the rest of the world even, but it would be very liberal compared to a conventional Christian who hold a very conservative position on the whole, because their beliefs are based around beliefs that are thousands of years old. And so that doesn't mean that they became liberal and left the church. It can happen for sure, but that's not an absolute by any means. And actually, a lot of people who deconstruct still hold very conservative positions. A lot of them still are very right-leaning in their politics, or certainly central-leaning. They're far from left-leaning, a lot of people that deconstruct. It's just more of a perspective thing that if you actually think about people that start to let go of Christian beliefs, it's going to be quite natural that as they grow in their own beliefs, and that might coincide with something that looks a little bit more progressive than some beliefs that are several thousand years old. And so it's not fair to say that people deconstruct just because they're liberal. And it's certainly not fair to say that just because they became a bit liberal, if they just went to a progressive church, they'd be happy. Most people are not deconstructing because they became liberal. And a progressive church won't tick their boxes as a more liberal position on Christianity. It might do if your main reason for deconstructing was you want to see more social justice. You want to see LGBTQ plus inclusiveness. It might be if you had some questions around those sort of things, maybe the progressive church might tick your boxes. But people leave and deconstruct for a myriad of reasons, and a lot of them aren't going to be ticked by the progressive church. It might work for some, it might not work for others, and we have to be sensitive to that and aware of that. It's not as black and white that people that deconstruct should have just found a progressive church and they would have been fine. They would have definitely stayed a Christian. So let's look at a couple of reasons people do deconstruct, and I'm just going to give a real broad overview. It's not going to be comprehensive. It's not going to include every reason by any means, because there are millions of reasons. There really are. There's so many. But some of the big ones, theological questioning is a big one. So as I said, people that deconstruct tend to be much more intentional about their understanding of God and themselves and the world and the universe, and they want to read the Bible and they want to understand it. And so most people that deconstruct start to have theological questions. They start to go, I'm not sure. We keep predicting raptures and it's been the end times for 2,000 years and Jesus hasn't shown up. Or it might be that they go, I'm not sure hell adds up. I don't see how God can be loving but punish people for eternity. That doesn't even seem just. Even the concept of justice, it just seems vindictive at a certain point. After 10 gazillion years, even Hitler's probably had enough. Even the worst person you can think of has probably been punished enough where you don't go, it seems a bit vindictive at this point. It's not a like for like justice or anything like that. And so people will start to question that. And maybe they look at restorative justice and go, maybe that's a better model for God and hell and the afterlife. And maybe they look at Jesus and go, this guy is supposed to represent God perfectly, but God looks very different a lot of the time. Maybe they're looking at the Old Testament and they're reading the Bible and they go, gosh, this is problematic, some of it. The bits where God says, go kill every man, woman, and child. So he's performing these mass genocides and infanticides, killing every child. And then when icing on the cake, he says, well, don't kill the young virgin girls. Keep them and divvy them up amongst your soldiers. What? Really? That's amazing to me as how many years as Christians, a lot of people can just ignore that, can read right through it and not see it for what it is. God is saying, keep all the young girls so they can be raped by the soldiers. That is the sort of thing that people start to question and start to think, maybe some of this needs deconstructed. Maybe some of this needs questioned and looked at differently, and it may not hold up, and I may end up having to have different beliefs. So theological stuff, and there's endless topics of theological exploration that can cause people to deconstruct. Those are just a few examples that are very kind of prominent and obvious and quite common. The other thing that's major in deconstruction, and this is a huge part, is life. Life happens. And the thing is, when you believe a certain way, that it's absolutely true, that it's black and white, it's easier to prove that as right or wrong a lot of the time. And it's easy to prove it as right when everything works. But it's really hard to prove it as right when it doesn't work, and when it doesn't add up, and when there are inconsistencies. And so we start to see in our life, as things happen, it doesn't really add up, right? What about if I was promised if I brought up my kids understanding God and reading the Bible, they would stay a Christian? Well, my son left and he's now an atheist. What do I do? What about, I'm supposed to love unconditionally and be Christ to the world and, love my neighbor. But actually my son is gay and now I am supposed to not accept him in the same way. I still have to love him, but not accept him for who he is. And that's causing me problems. It's making me question things, So some of these situations that can occur to you, to family members, maybe a loved one gets sick, maybe a loved one dies, and it causes you to stop and think and go, gosh, that person never knew Jesus, but they were one of the best people I've ever known. I can't fathom the 10 gazillion years of punishment for that person. It's really making me question. And so these are very interlinked, these theological questionings and the pressures of life that cause them. But ultimately, any kind of suffering can be a catalyst. And in fact, any kind of love can be a catalyst as well. So Richard Rohr is famous for saying great love and great suffering cause our growth and cause us to move forward. And it's really true that we come across these profound experiences in life and they cause us to question things. And so it's really complex what causes people to deconstruct. It might be that they were hurt or abused. It might be that they got sick or a loved one got sick or died. And could be that they are questioning some stuff about their identity that the church doesn't accept. Maybe they're a lesbian. Maybe they are trans. There's all sorts of things that's going to cause you to start questioning stuff because church isn't a welcoming place for you. It was a welcoming place for you until you became a lesbian, right? I know you don't become a lesbian, but until you start to go, oh crap, I'm not welcome here if this is who I am, right? Suddenly, this black and white everything works model doesn't work. Or suddenly this world where, well, if people are sick, we pray and it's fine. Well, when it's your mother and you're praying and she dies, suddenly you go, that didn't work. And I've never really noticed how many times prayer doesn't seem to work. But now it's hit close to home. I guess it doesn't work a lot of the time. And do we really believe that? What's prayer? And you start to question these things. That's really common. And so we're going to see a lot of different sparks that cause deconstruction. There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of nuanced things that cause people to deconstruct. And so people deconstruct for a myriad of reasons. But what's fascinating is the most common ones you hear, those myths that I threw out, are actually not the reasons people deconstruct. Now, maybe one or two people tick some of those boxes. Maybe you find an outlier. Maybe you've got an anecdotal example where someone did deconstruct to be cool. I don't know. I'm not really sure how that one plays out, but it's not common. Trust me. I speak to thousands of people about this process and help them on their journeys. And I've personally never met someone that's like, oh, deconstruction is really cool. How do I start? Right? It's just not something I've come across. And so on the whole, these myths generally don't mean anything as far as why people deconstruct. And what you're going to find as to why people deconstruct is it's more theological, it's more philosophical, it's more their life not adding up and not aligning with what they were told was true and what was right and what was wrong. And so you're going to see a whole host of reasons for why people deconstruct. But generally speaking, they're very meaningful reasons. They're not these wishy-washy, they didn't care or they backslid. Generally speaking, people deconstruct because they're plowing forward passionately trying to find answers. It's not because they didn't care, it's because they cared so much. It's not because they didn't know God, it's because they were pursuing God so passionately. It's not because they didn't go to church enough, it was because they went to church so much that it revealed some holes and some doubts and some questions in the mix. And I want to say, if you're deconstructing and those myths put you down, if they discourage you, don't listen to them. Put them to the side. Ignore them. They are not healthy to ruminate on, to question, to doubt yourself. You are perfectly entitled to deconstruct for whatever reason you want. Especially, I want to highlight, especially that one where people say, well, you only deconstructed because you were hurt. If you were hurt by the church and that caused you to stop and go, man, what is going on in church? What is Christianity? Why do people believe that? Why could people believe that and then still act the way they did? Those are great reasons. That's a great reason to start questioning and exploring. If people hurt you, you should be questioning this. You should be trying to make a healthy space between you and that person that hurt you. That is a really healthy thing to do. And so don't let other people shame you for that. That's disgusting. It really is very, very, very manipulative and abhorrent. It just doesn't take much. Put it in that context of a domestic abuse case. If someone was beating their wife or their husband and then that person left because of it, you would never, ever think to shame that person and say, oh, well, you only left because you were being beaten up, gosh, just saying it is just so disgusting. And that's what people are trying to do when they tell you that you only left because you were hurt. And so don't take that on. Don't put that on yourself. You've got enough to carry. If you're deconstructing, you are carrying enough weight and going through enough pain and suffering. Don't add other people's shame to the mix. All right. That's enough about why people deconstruct. We'll finish up there. I love you all. I hope you're doing well. I'll see you in another video. Peace. If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please, please, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.